Welcome to our deep dive into Analogy Suitability Analysis, a powerful tool inspired by the groundbreaking work of Nobel laureate Herbert Simon. Simon's research highlighted the profound role analogies play in simplifying complex issues and guiding decision-making. However, not all analogies are created equal. This method allows us to systematically evaluate the relevance and effectiveness of an analogy, ensuring it illuminates rather than obscures. By carefully selecting and analyzing analogies, we unlock sharper insights, better strategies, and wiser decisions. Join us as we explore how this tool enhances strategic thinking and simplifies even the most challenging problems through thoughtful, meaningful comparisons. On screen is a copy of the AI-powered Strategic Thinker, 3 Kindle edition, so we can copy the prompt into ChatGPT. On the right is AI-powered Strategic Thinker, GPT, which is optimized for this tool and others in the book. You will want to start with the first prompt and provide context for your organization in the brackets. It may also be beneficial to upload documents related to your work. Prompt: act as the staff to your organization name. Your job is to synthesize the following context to assist in performing the 6 empathetic questions. Context is in brackets. If you understand your task, your only response is 3 dots. For this purpose, I prepared a prompt that will make up an organization, but search the web for a real-world problem we can look at in this example. The prompt states, I need a hypothetical company from the agriculture industry. Search the web and find a real-world problem the industry has not been able to solve. Provide an overview of the problem and wait for the next step. After the initial prompt, there are 10 additional prompts executed in this video. They are 1, clearly define the purpose of the analogy and the situation being compared. 2, brainstorm a list of 5 similar situations that could be potentially used as an analogy to the current situation. 3, brainstorm a comprehensive list of criteria to assess similarity and dissimilarity between the 2 situations. This can include historical context, economic factors, environmental factors, duration of conflict, regional power intervention, morale, will and ideology, public opinion, size and composition of allies and opponents, professional state of forces, and likelihood of population rallying around one side or the other. Create a list. Create a comparison matrix with 4 columns, criteria from the previous list, similarity or dissimilar assessment, relevance, and provide additional notes to each remarks. 5, update the list by evaluating the current situation with each brainstormed analogy, using each criteria listed and determining whether they are similar or dissimilar. 6, update the matrix and determine the relevance of each criteria to the current situation. This can be characterized as high, moderate, slight, or consequential. 7, update the matrix, review current data, and provide notes and comments about key insights for each evaluation to serve as a record of the analysis. 8, update the similar, dissimilar column, conduct a thorough analysis of the similarities and dissimilarities of each analogy while considering a broad set of criteria such as critical variables. 9, infer conclusions from the analysis and describe how each analogy is useful and how it might be dangerous or how it may be unbeneficial to present. 10, review and revise each analogy. Document the process for future reference.
A significant unresolved challenge in the agriculture industry is the development of herbicide-resistant weeds, commonly referred to as superweeds. These weeds have evolved resistance to multiple herbicides, rendering conventional chemical control methods increasingly ineffective. This resistance leads to higher production costs, reduced crop yields, and greater environmental concerns due to the necessity for more intensive chemical applications. The rapid adaptation of these weeds continues to outpace current management strategies, posing a persistent threat. The Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal. Sources: The purpose of the analogy is to illustrate the persistent and escalating nature of superweed resistance in agriculture by comparing it to another well-known problem of adaptation and escalation in response to interventions, highlighting parallels to help conceptualize the problem and its implications. Situation being compared: agriculture and superweed resistance. In the agricultural industry, weeds have developed resistance to herbicides due to the overuse or misuse of chemical control methods. Over time, these superweeds have evolved to withstand even the most advanced herbicides, necessitating increased chemical application, the development of new herbicides or alternative solutions. This creates a cycle of escalating resistance and countermeasures. Analogy: hypothetical situation. This can be compared to antibiotic resistance in medicine, where bacteria evolved to survive previously effective antibiotics, leading to the need for newer drugs and more aggressive treatment strategies. Both involve a dynamic interplay of human innovation and natural adaptation. Through this analogy, the focus is on how iterative attempts to solve a problem can inadvertently worsen it by driving adaptive responses. The need for holistic, sustainable approaches that break the cycle of resistance rather than intensify it. Here are 5 analogous situations that parallel the issue of superweed resistance in agriculture. Cybersecurity and evolving malware. As cybersecurity measures improve, hackers develop increasingly sophisticated malware, creating a perpetual arms race between defensive software and malicious attacks. Pest resistance in urban environments. Urban pests, such as cockroaches or rats, develop resistance to pesticides and other control measures, forcing pest management companies to continuously innovate while facing diminishing returns. Performance-enhancing drugs in sports testing. Athletes and chemists devise new performance-enhancing drugs to bypass increasingly stringent drug testing protocols, resulting in a cyclical escalation of detection and evasion strategies. Traffic congestion and road expansion. Building new roads to alleviate traffic often induces additional demand, leading to even more congestion, a phenomenon known as induced demand, perpetuating the original problem. Climate change and geoengineering efforts. Large-scale geoengineering solutions aimed at mitigating climate change risks, e.g., cloud seeding or carbon capture, can have unintended consequences that exacerbate the problem or create new environmental challenges. Each analogy reflects a similar dynamic of adaptive resistance, unintended consequences, and the need for systemic solutions rather than short-term fixes. Here is a comprehensive list of criteria to assess the similarity and dissimilarity between two situations, structured across multiple domains. 1. Historical context, origins and triggers of the situation, evolution over time and key milestones, repeated patterns or cycles observed in similar contexts, cultural or historical precedents shaping responses. 2. Economic factors, financial costs and resource implications for involved parties, economic incentives driving behavior, impact on local, national, or global economies, availability and control of resources, e.g., arable land, capital, technology. 3. Ecological consequences, e.g., biodiversity loss, pollution, habitat changes, adaptations of the natural or physical environment to pressures, role of climate, geography, and weather in shaping outcomes. 4. Length of the problem or conflict and persistence over time, stages of escalation and resolution attempts, time required to observe and assess consequences. 5. Influence of dominant regional or global players in shaping outcomes, interventions by governmental, corporate, or international entities, degree of alignment or conflict between major actors. 6. Strength of conviction or beliefs driving the stakeholders, role of ideology or cultural identity in perpetuating the situation, psychological resilience of involved parties, e.g., farmers, researchers, policymakers. 7. Public opinion, popular support or opposition among affected populations, role of advocacy, activism, and awareness campaigns, media coverage and perception shaping outcomes. 8. Number and diversity of parties involved, strength, cohesion, and alignment of allies, diversity in strategies and goals of opposing forces. 9. Expertise and readiness of the entities addressing the issue, technological and logistical capacities of involved parties, comparative assessment of innovation and preparedness. 10. Potential for collective action and solidarity, barriers or incentives to unified efforts, e.g., economic constraints, political divisions, effectiveness of leadership in mobilizing support. 11. Ability of systems or stakeholders to adapt to changes, role of innovation in mitigating or exacerbating the issue, feedback loops that either sustain or resolve the conflict. 12. Complexity and scale, scope of the problem, localized against global, interdependencies with other systems, e.g., economic, ecological, technological, number of variables and stakeholders influencing outcomes. 13. Degree of uncertainty in outcomes, capability of stakeholders to foresee and influence developments, random factors that could shape resolutions. 14. Moral dilemmas faced in addressing the issue, trade-offs between short-term gains and long-term sustainability, equitability of proposed solutions across affected populations. 15. Scale of negative outcomes if no action is taken, perceived urgency to address the issue, ripple effects on adjacent systems or industries. This list offers a structured approach to compare and contrast two situations across multiple dimensions, ensuring a nuanced and holistic analysis. Comparison matrix. Criteria similar dissimilar assessment. Relevance high medium low additional notes remarks. Relevance high medium low additional notes remarks. Historical context similar high both situations involve cycles of adaptation and response. The history of herbicide resistance mirrors the progression of antibiotic resistance or malware evolution. Economic factor similar high both require significant financial investments in research, development, and implementation of solutions, impacting stakeholders economically. Environmental factor similar high superweeds and pest resistance, both affect ecosystems, often leading to increased chemical use, which further disrupts ecological balance. Duration of conflict issue similar high both are long-term persistent challenges that have spanned decades, defying easy or quick solutions. Regional power intervention dissimilar medium while agriculture may see intervention from governments and corporations. Other analogies, e.g. malware, may lack coordinated regional responses. Morale, will, and ideology dissimilar medium agricultural stakeholders focus on economic survival, whereas ideology plays a stronger role in cybersecurity or sports contexts. Public opinion dissimilar medium public awareness of superweeds is limited compared to issues like climate change or cybersecurity, reducing pressure for systemic change. Size and composition of allies and opponents similar medium both situations involve multiple stakeholders, including governments, corporations, and individuals, but agriculture includes more diverse grassroots participants. Professional state of forces similar high both contexts require expert intervention, e.g., agricultural scientists against cybersecurity experts, with an ongoing challenge of keeping pace with evolving threats. Likelihood of population rallying around decided as similar low public engagement in addressing superweeds is low, unlike public advocacy seen in areas like antibiotic resistance or environmental conservation. Systemic adaptation and innovation similar high both involve iterative cycles of adaptation and innovation, with technology playing a key role in managing and mitigating challenges. Complexity and scale similar high both issues are global in scale, involve significant complexity and interdependence with other systems, e.g., health, economy, and technology. Predictability and control. Similar high outcomes in both cases are difficult to predict, as adaptive resistance evolves faster than control mechanisms. Ethical considerations. Dissimilar medium. Ethical trade-offs are more pronounced in cases like medical resistance, human lives, compared to agricultural challenges, economic and environmental focus. Consequences of inaction. Similar high. Both situations can have severe long-term consequences if unaddressed, including economic loss, environmental damage, and systemic instability. Summary insights. The situations show significant similarities in areas such as economic factors, environmental impacts, adaptation cycles, and complexity. Dissimilarities arise more in areas involving public opinion, ideological influences, and ethical stakes. High relevance criteria such as systemic adaptation, complexity, and economic factors should guide focus for deeper analysis. Comparison matrix. Criteria similar. Process for reviewing and revising each analogy. To ensure each analogy is refined for maximum relevance and clarity, the following steps were applied to review and revise them. This process is documented to serve as a structured approach for future analyses of similar nature. Step-by-step process. Clarify core concepts of the current situation. Revisit the primary characteristics of herbicide-resistant superweeds, including their biological, economic, and environmental dimensions. Identify key challenges: adaptive resistance, escalating control costs, systemic complexity, and global scale. Reassess each analogy against key criteria. Using criteria like historical context, economic factors, environmental impact, scale, and ethical considerations, analyze whether each analogy captures critical variables of the superweed challenge. Identify gaps or misalignments. Evaluate how well each analogy reflects the complexities of the superweed issue. Flag areas where the analogy risks oversimplifying or misrepresenting key aspects. Refine analogies for specific use cases. Focus each analogy on the aspects it explains best. Reframe or contextualize elements that could lead to confusion. Document insights and revisions. Record changes for future reference, ensuring transparency and reusability of the methodology. Reviewed and revised analogies. 1. Cybersecurity and evolving malware. Review. This analogy is strong for explaining the adaptive and iterative nature of resistance, but weak in addressing environmental and economic dimensions. Revision. Focus on the arms race dynamic where attackers' weeds adapt to defenses' herbicides. Acknowledge limitations by clarifying that this analogy does not address ecological consequences or physical resource dependencies. Documentation insight. Use selectively for discussions on innovation and technological adaptation. Avoid overextending the analogy to environmental or public mobilization parallels. 2. Pest resistance in urban environments. Review. This analogy captures biological and economic parallels well but risks oversimplifying due to the typically localized scale of urban pest issues. Revision. Emphasize shared biological processes like evolutionary resistance and the economic burden of intensified control measures. Contextualize differences in scale by explicitly noting that superweeds are a global agricultural crisis with broader systemic impacts. Documentation insight. Highlight as the most direct analogy for ecological and economic dimensions. Clarify the global against localized nature of challenges to ensure appropriate framing. 3. Performance-enhancing drugs in sports. Review. This analogy aligns well with ethical and regulatory considerations, but lacks broader relevance to systemic, environmental, or economic factors. Revision. Narrow the scope to regulatory dynamics, how violators superweeds stay ahead of testing and enforcement herbicides. Avoid comparisons to individual behaviors, which trivialize the systemic scale of the agricultural issue. Documentation insight. Use for ethical and regulatory discussions only, clearly stating the analogy's limited scope. Avoid misleading connections to systemic or environmental factors. 4. Traffic congestion and road expansion. Review. This analogy is effective for illustrating feedback loops and unintended consequences but does not reflect biological or ecological aspects. Revision. Refocus on systemic dynamics, such as how solving one problem, congestion or weed control, can inadvertently worsen it by inducing new pressures, induced demand, or adaptive resistance. Explicitly acknowledge that this analogy is metaphorical and does not translate directly to biological systems. Documentation insight. Frame as a metaphor for explaining systemic inefficiencies. Avoid implying parallels to ecological or biological dimensions. 5. Climate change and geoengineering. Review. This analogy effectively captures the global scale, long-term stakes, and systemic complexity of superweeds. However, it risks conflating distinct challenges and creating an overwhelming sense of urgency. Revision. Refine the analogy to emphasize shared traits like global interdependence and the need for sustainable, systemic solutions. Avoid conflating superweed resistance with climate change's broader scope and clarify the distinct mechanisms involved. Documentation insight. Use to frame systemic and global challenges, but clearly delineate differences to prevent overgeneralization. Balance urgency with actionable insights to avoid fatalism. Final documentation of insight.
As we've seen, analogies are more than just comparisons. They're a strategic tool to simplify complexity and guide sound decision-making. By carefully assessing their suitability, we can illuminate challenges, clarify options, and enhance our strategic insight. Remember, the right analogy can sharpen our focus and lead us toward effective solutions, while the wrong one may mislead us. With analogy suitability analysis, we ensure our comparisons are not only insightful, but actionable.